In this lesson, we're going to begin our study of the human body. So as we begin the study of the human body, we want to understand what anatomy and physiology actually mean, because of course that's what this course is all about. Anatomy is the study of the structure and shape of the body and its parts and their relationships to one another. Now there's different levels of study that we can have with anatomy. What we typically tend to think of as anatomy is going to be gross anatomy. And the word gross anatomy has to do with the fact that these are going to be large structures that we're looking at for the most part. So if we're talking about what are the bones of the body, where are the bones located at within the body, that would all fall under gross anatomy. And that's primarily what we'll be looking at in this course. The other type of anatomy that we can have is when we're looking at really tiny things. And that would be what we call microscopic anatomy. And just like the word sounds, if we're talking about microscopic anatomy, then that will require the use of a microscope because the parts are going to be so small. Physiology, on the other hand, is the study of how the body and its parts actually work or function, how they interact with each other to function. It's very difficult to study anatomy without physiology because these two studies are so intermingled with one another. And that's why when you sign up for classes, typically it's not just an anatomy class or a physiology class. You'll have to take a class that has a little bit of both inside of it, because the anatomy and structure of a part is really going to contribute a lot to the overall function of that part. So if a cell has really tiny, thin exterior coatings, that will of course affect the way that it actually behaves in the body. Or if an organ is made up of layers of tissue, that will affect the way that it behaves inside of the body and how it's able to actually function and carry out different chemical reactions. So we will be studying both of these this semester, and hopefully you'll be able to see along the way how the two are definitely intermingled with one another. Now, as we begin our study of the human body and anatomy and physiology, one of the first questions is, what is the human body made of? Well, quite simply, the human body is made up of elements. And so I'm sure everybody has seen something like this before. This is a periodic table of elements. It shows us pretty much all of the different things that can compose matter. And that would be whether it's living matter or whether it's non-living matter. So whether it's an animal or whether it's a rock that we're looking at. Now there's a lot of elements on here, but when we're talking about living organisms, which is certainly what humans are going to fall under, living organisms are made up of four main elements. So we have kind of four popular ones on here. Those popular ones are going to be carbon, and carbon is right here. We're going to have nitrogen, which is right there next to carbon. Oxygen is going to be extremely common as well. And then we also have, I'm going to write it up here at the top of the list, we also have hydrogen, and that one's up here. And I point out these four specifically because these four specifically make up 96% of our bodies. So that means that they make up 96% of a human body. Now, 4% is made up of other things. So you do have a lot of other elements on here. We might have some sodium in there. We might have some phosphorus, some sulfur. Those will make up much smaller percentages of our body. So carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, those are kind of the big four when we start to study anatomy and physiology. Now, if we go on and we talk about how do we go from elements that we saw on the periodic table up to an actual human body, such as ourselves, these are what we call levels of organization. And at the very bottom of the level of organization is going to be the atom. The atom is a tiny building block of matter. We just pointed out the elements on the periodic table, and so you can have an atom of carbon, okay? And that atom of carbon is just going to be, we just write C as a symbol of carbon, but it's essentially a very small little structure. It does have some smaller pieces that make it up, but this is something that is at the most basic level when we start to study bodies. Now, we can take a bunch of those atoms and we can start to connect them together to make larger structures. And those larger structures, when we do start to combine atoms together, they are going to be called molecules. If we were to draw a molecule, we could have something like this. And so when we're looking at this, one thing to point out, or one thing that I want you to notice, is that it does contain those 4 elements, or 3 of those 4 elements that we were looking at. This is pretty small molecule really when we get down to it, and this is a very simple carbohydrate that we're looking at here. So we start off with atoms, then we start to connect them together so that we get molecules, so groups of atoms joined together, and then the next step is going to be to take those molecules and put them together to construct cells. Cells are considered to be the smallest units of living things, and what we mean by that is that they can actually live on their own. So they are self-sufficient little structures. So if I were to draw a cell, it might look something like this, and that cell is going to have lots of little stuff inside of it. And we'll look a lot closer at what cells are actually made of. But the boundary of the cell is made of molecules, the structures inside of it are made of molecules, and then, like I said, that cell can actually survive on its own. If we take a bunch of cells and we put them together, they can form what's called a tissue. Tissue is going to be groups of similar cells that have a common function. So these similar cells might come together and look something like this. This might be a tissue. These cells are all looking pretty similar to each other, and they are going to be, again, working towards a common function. If we have multiple tissues, 2 or more tissue types that are kind of working together to perform a specific function, now we change the name and we call that an organ. And an organ is going to be much larger. An organ example would be something like the heart. Okay, the heart is made up of different types of tissue, and the heart is going to be part of an organ system. An organ system is a group of organs. These are going to work together for a common purpose. So if I just list the heart up here as my example organ, the heart is going to participate in the cardiovascular system. And you've probably heard of that system, the cardiovascular system. This system is going to include the heart. It's going to include the blood, the veins, the arteries, and the cardiovascular system. Its purpose is to circulate around our body, and we will see that it is responsible for delivering molecules to different locations. So cardiovascular system, that is an organ system. We actually have 11 different organ systems that we recognize that do compose our bodies. The next level up beyond the organ system is the organism. So that would be us. So if I just draw down here on the bottom, here is my person. That is the body of the organism, and that would be considered the highest level of function.